Today I have my friend Frank Horvat. Frank, how are you today?
I'm doing so great, Raphael. Thank you so much for having me
Thank
today.
you for making the time. This has been a long while in the making. I think I actually, talked to you about being on the podcast over a year ago. And then, of course, I got distracted and I changed formats and platforms. And then I'm like, oh my God, I was supposed to have you on here. So I'm so glad that you're still interested and that you're here now to tell us your story. So thank you. Thank you for making the time. I want to give you an opportunity to get a couple of minutes, or as long as you want, to tell us a little bit about you so the audience get to know you and they get to know your journey that you take it to do what you do today.
Thanks, Raphael. Yeah, so I'm a composer and a musician, born and raised, and still living here in Canada. Specifically, Toronto is the city I call home. And as I said, I'm a composer of what you might call modern art music or modern classical music. Um, also like to think a lot of times in my creative process as sort of a conceptual artist because a lot of my compositions are very much based on very sort of defined concepts or ideas. I also do a lot of work. I have done a lot of work over the years in music education, and I'm a pianist, so I've done some performing as a pianist. And otherwise, my musical practice, my creative musical practice, is often these days very, very strongly around the idea of collaboration, working with other musicians where I compose music for them to perform or to record. But I've also collaborated with a lot of non musical artists, other artists, visual artists. I just actually came back from Italy a couple of months ago where I was working on a sound installation in an art museum in Florence. And so that's huge in my life. And I've also done a lot of work with and collaborated with a lot of non-governmental organizations that are working towards basically what I think of making the world a better place. So a lot of my work music is based around ideas around the environment, climate change, social justice issues, human rights. And finally, a big thing in my life is my heart and soul directly, and the idea of spirituality. I've done projects that reflect that, and also mental health issues. I've I guess what you can say is a person who battles depression and anxiety. But for many years now, I've done what I like to think of a good job of managing my depression, and anxiety, because I lead a very productive and happy and fulfilling life. And so, as the years have gone on, and I've done better at managing that in what I like to call my mental health toolkit of making that all better, I've let my musical practice reflect that, and I've allowed my music to tell stories about my own personal journey, and also tell stories of other people doing that. So my music is sort of used as a platform for a number of things.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for the background. And I have had the opportunity to listen to some of your music. It's beautiful. I I appreciate. I'm a amateur musician myself. I play the guitar and I sing. Uh, not for money. Not and as a creator myself, but more of a just just playing the music that I love, that I grew up with, and things like that. And I can say, for me, it's been a key element of keeping my peace. In fact, I have a guitar in every desk that I work. I have an office here. I have a guitar right next to me. I have a guitar in my desk in my place in my office. And when I find myself stressed out, upset because of how things are going, I find that that is a good tool for me to disconnect for whatever I'm allowing to be bothered by, and bring me back to to a state of steady state. but that's not something that I always had. Uh, that's something that I learned, as an adult, much later in life. Is your relationship with music new, or is this the path that you've taken since you were a young boy?
So my definitely my relationship with music is something that basically I don't know my life without. I took my first lessons on the accordion when I was 5 years old. When I was very young, I really wanted to take organ lessons, but when my mom and dad brought me to a music school, they said, "Oh, this little guy can't play organ. He can't reach the pedals, you know. So why don't you start him on accordion, and then you could start with that." So I started with accordion, and then around 9, I started taking piano lessons as well, and then just life took off. But I love what you're saying about the idea about sort of like the therapeutic relationship to music, and I have to say that some of my friends that I find to be the most passionate about music. I have two friends that I can think of. One in my hometown of Ottawa one of my best friends, and we went to high school together. And the other is based here in Toronto. These two friends, they are the most passionate two people I know about music. And the one thing they both have in common is they don't do it as a living. They don't have to earn money about that. And even though I do make a living from music, this is my profession in that respect. I'm a professional musician because that's how I make my living. I find that there is something to be learned from people like you. Who, music is your passion. This is your outlet. This is your sanctuary, where you can recharge, rejuvenate. And when I was young and starting off, and especially like studying more in a classical realm, there's a certain discipline that's involved with it, a certain like training regimen that's very similar to athletics and sports. I could say that for any genre of music. If you really want to get great, you have to have definitely a certain level of discipline. There's a lot of sort of like the general society might look at musicians and say, oh, they're so talented, or that they're just sort of naturally gifted. But even in music history, we know that Mozart was like the first child prodigy, started, playing piano when he was 3 and started composing when he was 5. And, it was just ridiculous types of prodigious talent. But even Mozart was quoted as saying that nothing in my art comes easy to me. Everyone thinks it's come easy to me, but I have had to work really hard for them. That's me paraphrasing that. And so I think when you do something as a profession, it's really easy sometimes to get so immersed within it and have to achieve like the levels, bars of success, that you have to enact a certain level of discipline, but that could allow you not to enjoy it. And I've been there for sure. But the one thing about what I love about what I do, especially now as I'm doing this now for multiple decades, is I'm learning right now. I love getting older because I'm learning how to make sure that I maintain my passion for this. That, I keep asking myself, if no one was going to pay me to do this, would I still be doing this? And most definitely, yes, I would. That's how much I love it, because, like you said, it just gives me a little bit more joy. But early on, it wasn't like that. And I look back and sort of have regret, because it would have been nice to enjoy it more then.
No, that's very interesting. You've touched on a couple of points that I myself find quite interesting. This idea of being original and true to yourself versus being commercial, right? I think that is one of I consider myself a lover of music. I try to have an open mind, about different types of music. I've had the good fortune of traveling around the world and being exposed to different styles of music, and I always try to find, the connection between, those composers and those different styles, with the human condition, right? And some come easier than others, but at some point, most stuff that's out there was done to connect as opposed then to make money. And I have these conversations with friends. It's like, do you think that music in general has degraded, right? And I always, in fact, it was just last week, I was having a conversation with someone about this. Like, do you think that music now is not as good that music, say, in the 50s and the 60s or during classical times, right? With Mozart and Beethoven and so forth. And my answer is always the same. It's like, well, you have popular music, the stuff that seems to connect with the majority of the audience. That I don't have, I'm not as excited about that as I used to be. But then there's the rest of the music, which is the majority of the music that's out there, that is being made by folks like you who make a living doing it, who love it, right? But, maybe you're not making hundreds of millions of dollars in record sales, right? Like somebody else, right? But
Exactly.
and I gave the example is there used to be a time, I guess I'm aging myself, where you would go to Starbucks and they had the CDs of musicians that weren't well known, but they were musicians, original music, coffee shop style music, and some of that stuff was beautiful, but nobody knew who these people were. But yet they're still making a living, they're happy with what they're producing, and the quality of that has a timelessness to it, right? That a lot of popular music doesn't have. Do you agree with that? Do you see eye to eye with that, or do you have a parallel view on that?
Well, I can see what you're saying, and I find those kind of conversations, like, comparison of eras, quite interesting and stuff, because basically we've always had creative people doing interesting things, but the pop culture world that we live in, will often either push things to the forefront for us to notice more that we can't help but notice through our devices and everything like that. And furthermore, there's an apparatus to, like a historical apparatus to put certain things on a pedestal and that type of thing. But the idea about what's great music, that is always that's always can be a generational thing. And one of the places that I learned something very fascinating about was a book I read many years ago by I believe he's Canadian. I'm not sure if he's Canadian, but he's Canadian-based. He's a professor at McGill University, a neuroscientist named Daniel Levitan. He wrote a very, very famous book called "This Is Your Brain on Music," and there was many, many takeaways from that book. Well, one of the interesting takeaways from this conversation we're having is the idea that they did a lot of studies of people's reaction, like scanning the brain of like how it was, the brain was being like stimulated, ignited by what they were hearing, and they were doing that through an MRI machine as they were pumping through the speakers and stuff. And what they ended up finding is that the brain was most stimulated for each individual when it was music that they were listening to that was first put out and that the person would have first heard between the ages of around 11, 12, and 13. Okay, so you do the calculation, you know how old you are, go back in years, and think about what music were you listening to then. And this study basically concluded that there's a really good chance that music you were listening to around that age, your preteens, teens type of thing, is probably the music you still love to this day, and that you'll probably put on a pedestal, and then anything else coming after that, you'll say, oh my gosh, there's no comparison, blah, blah, because this has been going on forever, right? When rock and roll came out in the 1950s, the parents of those baby boomers were like, oh my God, what's this? What's this crazy thing? Like, what's this Little Richard or Chuck Berry? For them, it just sounded like, there was like, they didn't hear any of the nuance, and then now, there's stuff coming out now. Those people are listening when Hendrix came out, and psychedelia and stuff. They were like, that's chaos. In fact, I even remember the first time I heard Jimi Hendrix. Not in the '60s, obviously, but on a bus trip. On a school trip, somebody lent me a cassette. Yes, for young people, those are things we used to put in our Walkmans, which was sort of like way before cell phones or smartphones or whatever. And somebody lent me a cassette of Hendrix. I didn't even know who Hendrix was and that kind of thing. I listened on the bus. The bus is moving and I'm listening. I'm not joking, Raphael. I went into the bathroom. Maybe I was a little sick, but I threw up. I threw up. I never heard anything like this. This psychedelia, this virtuosic guitars. Guess what? Now fast forward to today, Hendrix is one of the most important musical figures, not just in 20th century, but a huge influence on myself. I've listened every time I can see anything, hear recordings, watch YouTube videos of, I'm just mesmerized. Like you said, timelessness, right? One of my favorite albums of all time is an album, one of my favorite bands is Radiohead. And they're still around, and they're an amazing band. But the album, one of their most important albums they ever came out with was called Kid A. And it came out in 2000. And my friend and I were discussing that album recently. And we looked at each other and we're like, we're listening to something that's 25 years old now. And it's just like, but it sounds like they just made it today, you know what I mean? So it's like, so the short answer to your question is, music is like everything in life. You have to go searching for it. You cannot make broad general statements, oh, this is better than that, or we're in a better era, or it's not so good or less, because guess what? There are albums, thousands of albums of music being released every single day on this planet. Thousands of talented people. So I'm a music producer, but I'm also a music consumer, like maybe a lot of the listeners here. And it's up to us to constantly go searching, just like we have to find great books, great theater, great films that will inspire us, and we listen to each other. This is the community aspect of music, which I love so much, because if it wasn't for the community I'm in, I wouldn't be discovering new things that surprise me and bring me awe every day. With music, we need more awe in our life of like, oh wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard, or this is fulfilling me this way. This is the beautiful thing of music. As long as there'll be humans on this planet, we will always have the opportunity to discover new music. And that's one of the great things of living.
Well, that's wonderful. I agree with you. I have to admit, I lived, I'm 53 years old now. So I went through a stage, just like you said, it's like, oh, that, and my kids remember that. It's like, oh, that's trash. That's not real music. I like to believe that I've grown out of that, and I'm always trying to appreciate the nuances. But you said a few things there that are interesting. I'm gonna have to pick your brain on this a little bit, because music is like, you talk about that study. I actually read that study, and there's something about the impression. We are impressionable beings, right? And where we are in time at that age, what's happening in our lives, what's happening with our families in school, and then you hear something, and then it just, it's very impressionable, right? But music is also very personal. And one thing that happened to me, I'm very curious to see if this resonates with you. One thing that happened to me, because I learned to play I started teaching myself to play the guitar. It was around 25, 26 years ago when my daughter was born. And before that, I had played the organ when I was a kid, and so I knew a little bit of, music theory. I dabbled with the piano a little bit, but I wasn't really very good at it. So it wasn't until I started playing the guitar and started singing and realizing the difficulty, right, that comes with playing a musical instrument, that I realized that I grew appreciation for types of music that I didn't like. Let me give you a perfect example. Dave Matthews, right? Everybody knows Dave Matthews.
Yep.
I did not become a fan of Dave Matthews until I started playing and appreciating the complexity of his music. Because his music didn't move me personally like other musicians, other authors. But now I follow him. Now I listen to him, but it's with a different ear. I still don't find like his music connects with my soul like some other type of music, but it connects with my intellect. It connects with like, wow, like how did he do that? Like how are they so tight? How is the band so connected? And how do they make these changes? And that's incredible what they're doing. I mean, they're amazing. I find them amazing. Do you see yourself as a consumer and as a producer going back and forth between those two worlds, the world of connecting with people's soul versus connecting with people's intellect?
Absolutely. I love that idea. You said so much about this idea of like you had to play your instrument in order to better understand it or appreciate it. I really firmly believe in that. That's why for a lot of like musicians, especially classically trained musicians or people who love classical music, people love Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the most important, influential. He's basically, you can almost think of him like Shakespeare is to English literature, Bach is to Western music, right? And I'm not just talking Western classical music. We're talking every Western, formed music, even to our popular forms, rock, jazz, blues. Everybody who plays music or really appreciates music on a really sort of deep, immersive level loves Bach. But I know a lot of people that can't stand Bach, you know what I mean? Because they just want, for them, their relationship with music is they want music to make them feel something. They want to hear, they love sad songs, or they love, thrash metal and they want it to build up their intensity, right? So that's their relationship with music. And basically none of it's wrong. None of it's wrong. That's the beautiful thing, and that's what I love about music. It's like other things in this respect, but music is one of those beautiful things that it can equally stimulate your heart and soul, but it can equally engage you in thoughts, in ideas, in and not just like happy ways. Like I know I have family members, they love to dance. Dancing is the most important thing. So if I was to play, Dave Matthews or Bach or something that's maybe a little bit more intellectual, they just wouldn't get it, because for them they want to do that twist again, like they did last summer. So it's like, that's the beautiful thing, is that music is for everybody. And the one thing that I love about your journey, which is really, I hope, a big takeaway from the listeners today, is that you can appreciate music on a whole other level if you make the decision to learn. I think one of the greatest things, there's been endless amount of research done that people who learn to play a musical instrument are happier, they're smarter, they're avoiding diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's later. So you can do it for all these clinical reasons, but forget all that. You should just do it because of why you've done it, And the only other thing I'll say to you describing your own journey, since I do work with a lot of students, and this is important to emphasize because I think a lot of people think they can't do it. Well, I listen to so-and-so on the radio. I'll never be able to play like them. I'll never be able to sing like them. So this is not for me, right? It's like, I'm sure a lot of people have that same relationship with activities like golf or tennis. You know what I mean? It's just like, well, I'm never going to be as good as Tiger Woods. Why would I bother picking up a golf club, right? You know, of course, that's where we have to be careful. We have to be careful in life not to compare ourselves to others. And you know what? And I do it all the time. You know, I'm thinking, oh, so-and-so composer got huge commission with so-and-so, you know, I'm not worthy. I'm not doing a great job. You know what I mean? And so, but I've also noticed that with some of my students over the years, especially adult students that I've taught. You know, where they're like, oh, well, I watched somebody on YouTube do it this way. You know what I mean? I can never do it that way. I'm not good enough. You know, so like, so that's why I'm challenging you a bit on what you just said earlier, right? Like if we continue to live in a world, or we feel that the only way we measure our value is in relationship to other people, then, you know, if we're doing that with playing the guitar, then what else are we doing that with, right? And furthermore, of course, the other beautiful thing about music is that even though there's a lot of competition shows related to music, you know, the American Idol, blah, 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 who can sing great and that kind of thing, but what is that? That's just somebody's opinion. You watch those shows and you're like, I don't agree with the judges, what they said. I love that person singing. Or they had a vote where the people had, and they were like, I can't believe all those people voted to vote that person off. Then they were the best singer. Now, there's no such thing as better or worse or thing. It's just music is art. That's the beautiful thing. I can be like clapping, banging my hands on this table right now. Guess what? I'm making music. Some people will like it, some people won't, but I just made art. Everybody has the ability to it. And I just want to make sure we emphasize that, because I think that inhibits a lot of people, right, of doing that. And it's a pity, right?